Welcome everyone to Level Up Together in the first season, Level 4, which is going to be featuring Dr. William Gibbons. This is on the topic of writing and editing for academic publication, which is a very important skill that touches on something nearly, if not all of us do, and is very important to our careers and to our research and how we develop and present it. So without further ado, let me read Dr. Gibbons' bio. Dr. William Gibbons joined Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute as Dean of the School of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences in 2024. A leading scholar of music and media, Gibbons' wide-ranging research explores the intersections of the arts, humanities, and technology in contemporary culture, especially in video games. In addition to dozens of books, articles, and chapters, Gibbons also co-edited the Oxford Handbook of Video Game Music and Sound, as well as the essay collections Music in Video Games and Music in the Role-Playing Game. His book, Unlimited Replays, Video Games, and Classical Music, explores the relationship between games and the arts from the early arcade to the contemporary concert hall. His newest co-edited volume, Global Histories of Video Game Music Technology, breaks new ground by decentering North America and highlighting previously unexplored game history, arts, and technology from many countries around the world. In high demand as a public speaker, Gibbons regularly delivers invited lectures, keynotes, and pre-concert talks at universities, conferences, and concert venues across the United States and Europe. So in terms of format, we'll go about 40 minutes with just Dr. Gibbons speaking and presenting on this topic, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. So everyone, please bring your burning questions about academic writing, about the publication process, about how to respond to editors in that publication process, and feel free to drop them in the Q&A function. If you drop them in the general Zoom chat, it might get lost as more people add stuff. So please drop it in the Q&A. And without further ado, let's turn it over to Dr. William Gibbons and give him a hand in the chat.
Well, thanks so much, Thomas. It's really a pleasure to be here and get to talk to you a little bit today. I hopefully will not go the full 40 minutes of just me. I'd love to spend more time on Q&A, but we'll see how it goes. And if there's like a really burning question in the chat, Thomas, feel free to interview me and we can chat there. So. Thomas gave me a great intro just now, but I will just talk a little bit about who I am, which is I got my PhD in musicology from UNC Chapel Hill in 2010, and I would say my academic career has been varied. I started off with a one-year job, like a lot of folks, at University of Iowa. Most of my professor career was at TCU in Fort Worth, which is a R2, mostly teaching-centered place. Then I was a dean of the Crane School of Music at SUNY Potsdam, which is a sort of quirky place where it's like a 2,500 person liberal arts college, but there's 550 music majors. And now, just since last year, I'm dean of the School of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences at a big tech-centered research institute. So I come at this topic from a lot of different perspectives, and hopefully I can comment on people wherever they're coming from or wherever they might want to go in academic publishing. Most of my time these days is in administration. I still carve out some time to do research. I'm working on a couple of really interesting projects. Actually, I see Nina's on here. Nina and I are meeting, I think, very soon to talk about a fun project we're working on. But I found, for the same reason that I am really enjoying being a dean, I've mostly moved from authorship into editing. And that's mostly for me because I find a lot of satisfaction in helping other people accomplish their goals and get where they want to be. I love writing and I love it, sort of being about me, but I also love the experience of sort of helping other people take their ideas and translate them into new forms. So you see some of my stuff up here. I won't go on about this, but I have had the pleasure of working with multiple different publishers in lots of different forms. So that's where I'm coming from. And I want to stress that today is really just my random perspective. Every single person who's worked in publishing is going to have a different perspective on these things, and your mileage may vary. So take that for what it's worth. So I'm coming at the idea of this. I just actually put this together today in terms of this part of the idea, writing as a co-op game. And what do I mean by that? So I spent most of my sort of gaming life as a hardcore solo gamer. I play a lot of long RPGs, mostly, I'm like sitting in dark rooms. Half of high school was like sitting in the basement playing whatever new Final Fantasy game was coming out or something. And it's only the last couple of years that I've really gotten into playing co-op games. My partner Sky is also a gamer, and we've gone through all of these different games in the last little bit. So Baldur's Gate 3, Split Fiction, Overcooked. I'll talk about co-op games as much as you want to, but I think it's a very different experience for me. I've learned to appreciate games in a different way. And it actually strikes me a lot that that experience is much like the transition I've had in publishing, right? It's a little bit like the publishing experience of you're always working with someone else. I'll talk a little bit more about that. If you haven't played these are three of my favorites. I will give a danger warning on Overcooked. You have to really know and like the people that you're playing that game with, or it will destroy your relationship. So just warning on that. All right, so what do I mean here? So when you're playing single-player games, right, I assume most of us play single-player games sometimes, you're in control of the timeline, right? If you have 30 minutes twice a week to play games, you can do it that way. If you have, if you want to just take a whole weekend and hammer out a whole game, you can do that too. You're in control of how much you play, when you play, how it goes. You also get to make all the choices. If you're in the type of game where you can choose, if you're playing Baldur's Gate, you get to decide whether you're evil, whether you're good, what you're doing. You get to make those decisions sort of all on your own, right? You get to craft your character very much around what you want. And the same token, minimal compromise. Like you typically don't have to, you can do everything, you can do nothing, you do whatever you want. And then the focus is on your experience, right? If you're the only one playing, if you're the only one involved, it's about how you feel, how you enjoy the experience, and how you consume it as a player. On the other side, though, I would say with co-op games, it's a little bit different. You have to coordinate your timelines, right? So if you're playing games with somebody, either multiplayer or couch co-op, you have to make sure you both have time. You have to talk ahead of time. You have to think about when you're going to play and how you're going to play. Your choices have to be collaborative. I can't tell you how many times in Baldur's Gate I've been off doing something else and I hear someone from the other room saying, oh my god, I'm gonna fight, come help me, or I was gonna solve this way and you solved it this way. It has to be sort of collaborative. And by the same token, you have to be willing to compromise and you have to get better at communication. And this is something we're not always great at in academia. I think we tend to be very focused on sort of what we do. I think about, I'm a pianist too, and I think about that experience, right? That, it's a very solitary thing. You're crafting it on your own. You're sort of in the practice room doing this very isolated thing versus sort of being part of an orchestra or an ensemble where you really have to learn to collaborate and communicate with people. And then I would say in co-op games, it's about shared experience. And this is another one where that might mean different things for different people. I'm one of those people, I hear a lot, maybe it's because I'm an only child, so maybe we can take a poll on this later. But I'm one of those people when I'm playing video games, when I'm playing board games or whatever, I'm like, it's not about who wins, it's not about who loses, it's about having fun, and I want to make sure everybody's having a good time, and if I need to adjust the way I'm playing to make someone else have a better time, that's what I'll do. Versus other people who might be like, no, this is about, it's a shared experience, but like, I'm going to fight for it to be the way that I want it to be, or we're going to, it's going to create a conflict of some kind. Okay. So what I want to get at is in academic publishing, as we all know, we're not the only person, right? So we're not, as the author, the only person who gets to have a say or who gets to have any control. We need to think about what our needs are as authors, right? So maybe that's like, I need to express myself. I need to get this major point across because it's important. Or maybe it's, I need to get this publication out in a year because I need tenure, or I need a job, or I need something like that. So there's lots of possible needs you could have. Your publisher has sets of needs, right? They want to make money. They're publishers. It's a business. They also need to protect their brand. They need international reach. They need to get into cutting edge topics. They have lots of things they need. Editors have needs, same things. Maybe they need a book to come out for tenure. Maybe they need to craft this new project they're working on. Maybe they need to meet a certain timeline. And then you have your reader needs. Like if you have a reader, are they looking for specific information? Are they reading because they enjoy this topic, or are they reading because they're a graduate student who's really trying to power through this course and they need to just get access to something really quickly? So think about that. So the tricky part is you're trying to end up, I think, in the middle of all of this. And so how do you balance these competing priorities? How do you balance the multiple perspectives and multiple stakeholders, if you will, that go into sort of crafting an academic writing project? Okay, here's a Split Fiction quote, if you can't see that. It's the, why be a writer? There must be easier ways to get paid, right? This is not an easy thing that we do. There are certainly easier ways to get paid than academic writing, and nobody gets super rich, as far as I'm aware, off of academic writing. So I'm going to start off with a couple bits of general writing advice, and then I'll talk through working with editors and working with publishers. So I would say first tip for general writing, biggest thing, consider your audience first. This is where I always tell people to start. It's where I try to start, although I don't always do the best job. Think about who is your intended reader, right? Is this meant for someone who, let's talk about video game music since this is video game. Is this, aimed at gamers who might be interested in video game music? Is it aimed at hardcore, traditional musicologists who don't know anything about video games maybe? Is it aimed at, academic readers, students, how do these different positionalities intersect, right? Who's the intended reader? And relatedly, who's the intended journal or publisher, right? Based on that reader, you might determine, I want this different publisher, I want this different journal, and why do I want that? Make those decisions if you can up front. I'll talk a little bit more about this point later, or people can ask. And then, how do I write with that intended reader behavior in mind, right? How would a different type of reader approach this differently? So I put a couple of points up here. Thomas suggested a couple of these very thoughtfully the other day. So when we think about writing about, let's say, video game music, right, how much context do we need? I remember when people first started writing about video game music, and in like 2008 to 2010, every single article had to start with like 1,500 words of like, this is video game music, and this is a brief history of it, and this is why we should care about this. And then, and now I think we mostly don't need to do that anymore. We can sort of cut straight to what we're trying to say. But depending on what the audience is, you might need to give a little bit more context in some other way. If it's mostly writing for a game studies type audience, you might need to give a little more musical context. If it's mostly the other way, you might want to give a little bit more game context. Just think about how you want to situate it. Signposting, I think, is really important. And Thomas and I were talking about this. I saw this really interesting interview the other day about Netflix and the way that Netflix is encouraging people to write for their shows and their movies. And what they've said basically is, based on their observations of viewer habits, you need to, if you're doing a 90-minute movie or a 2-hour movie, you need to just straight up say the plot about 5 times over the course of that, because people are down on their phone, or they're getting up to do something else, or they're not paying attention. And Netflix was getting a lot of criticism because people were saying, "Oh, this didn't make any sense," but it was just that they weren't paying attention in the parts that were necessary. So we kind of have to do the same thing, I think, where increasingly the studies show almost no one reads an academic article front to end, right? You either search for exactly the thing that you're looking for, or you're bouncing around in a sort of non-linear way. So you have to sort of keep saying, this is what I already said, this is what I'm saying now, this is what I'm going to say in the next little bit, to sort of help people learn to read or learn to access it in this kind of non-linear way. That's even more the case with books. I've seen a lot of data on the, my couple of monographs about how people read those, because you can download them a chapter at a time. And almost never does someone read it cover to cover. They're looking for one specific chapter and they read that. So I kind of have to, every single chapter, you sort of have to resituate people in what you've already said, and maybe direct them to other chapters as things get, as you get later in the process. And then again, how do you organize things? With that readership in mind, how might you choose to organize the information in a different way? So we can talk more about this. This is a new tool, relatively new tool. I'm super conflicted about AI, like a lot of people. I don't know if anybody's used Notebook LM, but it's both amazing and existentially terrifying. It's an app that you can upload pretty much anything you want to, in terms of, let's say, a PDF, right? So I just uploaded a couple of days ago my book Unlimited Replays to this thing. And it will generate a podcast, like a 30-minute podcast that sounds quite authentic, where it sort of summarizes the book, right? And it's actually funny. They make jokes, they make references. And I was listening to it and I was like, wow, that is actually, in some ways, that's better than the way I said it, right? That's a very smart analysis of it. And it'll generate quizzes, or you can do flashcards, or you can do all this sort of stuff. So it's a little bit terrifying, but it actually is super helpful, I think, when you are working on drafts, to say, wow, is this intelligible to someone who's reading it this way, or someone who's consuming it this way? So we can talk about this later on, but I like using these things as tools. All right, then I want to talk just a bit about navigating the peer review process. which is, I would frankly say, is the best and the worst thing about academic publishing. And it's the best because, it's the way that we ensure a high quality of research product, but it's also demoralizing sometimes. It really slows the process down, creates a ton of work for everyone involved. It's just sort of a drag. So just a couple of things to keep in mind for people who might not have navigated this process before. We are all flawed and busy human beings. I hear from folks that I know who are journal editors that they're having to send out, sort of post-COVID, they're sending out articles for review to maybe 4 or 5 times as many people as they had to before. And I know for a fact there's a lot of people who, once you start agreeing to do it, they start, piling it onto you. And people are sometimes reviewing 10, 12, 15 articles a year, which is a huge time commitment. So we're all flawed and busy human beings. Sometimes people wake up on the wrong side of the bed. Sometimes people are just too busy to write a good report and they have to turn it in anyway. So, take it for what it's worth. Something I wish I'd known a lot earlier is I would say there's almost always something you can take away even from a bad review. Even from someone who just hates your work, there's usually something that's useful in there. And when I get peer review back, this is just me, I like to read it and then sort of toss it away where I can't see it for like a week, and then come back to it after I sort of process for a while, and then usually at that point I'm able to sort of find something that's useful. But my initial reaction is always like Haley here, you're stupid, right? How do you not understand the genius work that I've put in front of you? It has to sort of sit with my ego has to deflate for a while and go from there. Here's good news, I think. If you do get unhelpful reviews, journal editors, book editors, they're not dumb for the most part, and they know how to spot an unhelpful review. So, I've gotten feedback from journal editors before where they say, here are the 2 reviews, take them for what they're worth, right? And do what you want to do with that, right? They're able to spot that and they weigh that accordingly. I would say as a response, you don't have to do everything, but you can't do nothing. Which is to say, you can't just say, thanks for these reader reports, I'm not changing anything. I think you have to be willing to say, I'll change this, I'll do this, but by the same token, it's okay to push back a little bit and say, I'm not going to make this change that's suggested, and here's why. I think that's a very reasonable response. They're not going to expect you to do everything, or you end up with some sort of weird Frankenstein thing. And very often, I'm sure many of you have had this experience too, you get mutually contradictory reader reports, right? Where someone says, I need you to add 1,000 words about this thing that you talked about really briefly. And the next one will say, cut out this part about this, it's not helping your argument at all, right? And you sort of have to pick, okay, I obviously can't do both of those things. I've got to do one or the other. Okay, a little bit on working with editors, and I separated this out into 2 different kinds of editors. So I would say type 1, working with journal editors. So I'm thinking here about something like JS, Journal of Sound and Music and Games, or JAMS, or those type of journals. So I would say start with doing your research on the journal to make sure it's a good fit. And this is the reference here from Final Fantasy Tactics, right? You don't ever want to send something to a journal and get a response back that says, this is not a good fit for this journal, right? Like, why did you do this? You sent an article about medieval chant to 20th century music, and we don't see the connection here. So I would say make sure that's a good fit. And what does that mean? Usually if you go through the journal like table of contents, you can get a sense for, wow, they publish a lot in this area. They do a lot with this. They're clearly interested in these types of conversations. And if you can situate your article within those, I think you're much more likely to get it through the process pretty easily. Same thing with tone, right? I tend to have a little bit of a snarky, funny tone in articles that I write, and I like being able to publish them that way. And I wouldn't send that into Journal of the American Musicological Society, right? That would just not, it would not make it through review. They would find that, probably some people that work on that journal would find that offensive because it just has a very serious tone, that journal tends to. Same thing with scope. This is a hilarious thing to me that I've seen a few times where journal articles, I would say, tend to be what, 6,000 to 10,000 words. Sometimes people I know have received articles that are 25,000 words long, and like that's a short book, right? So that they're not going to do that, and they're not going to take the time to trim that down that much. That would just be that's an unreasonable expectation. So think about what the scope is, and how that shapes your argument, right? You can say something different in 4,000 words than you can say in 8,000 or 10,000 or 12,000. And then journal guidelines, just the stuff, it's the same stuff that you would see with, when you're submitting CVs or grant applications or things like this. Just follow the guidelines in terms of citation style. It's not going to nobody's going to reject an article just because the citation style is wrong, but it's just a point against it, right? It's just going to sort of irk them to say, we specifically said we wanted it in Chicago and they sent an APA or whatever, and it's just, be careful with that. I said this a little bit earlier, but this is one of my biggest suggestions to people, and that's, I would say, if you can, write with the journal in mind from the start, which is to say, if you can start from a position of, I want to write an article for Journal of Sound and Music and Games. What are the types of things that they do? How can I, shape something to that, or how can I adapt my work to that journal? It saves a lot of work because you're not then saying, wow, okay, I shopped it around here and now I'm going to do this. So now I have to change this and I have to redo this and I have to change the whole tone. And, if you can say, I want to start by writing a jams article, I'm going to go from there. I think that can be very helpful. Don't send drafts. This is a real world thing. It may seem silly, but sometimes people will send really unpolished material to high quality journals, and that not only is it going to get rejected, people will remember that. So I think that's a thing you have to be really careful about. Don't send an unproofread master's paper to jams and just say I want to do this, right. It's like the people who just send a random CV to a job they're not qualified for. It's not that you can't publish in major journals at different points, or that you can't publish master's material or doctoral material. I actually think that's incredibly important to do. It just needs to get to a really polished place before you send it there. This is a huge problem these days for some of the reasons that I mentioned earlier. I literally had an article under review for 6 years with a journal. And it just got comical. At a certain point, I was it just became a joke for me that I would just occasionally do it. And I had to rewrite the thing 5 times because new books would come out. But if it's taking a lot longer than they indicate it's going to, it's okay to reach out for updates. Sometimes stuff gets lost in the cracks, they forget about it, something's happened in the pipeline, they need to poke some peer reviewer. I think it's fair to say, hey, I really need this, especially if there's a timeline for you, where you say, I really need this article to come out before I go on the job market, or this is really connected to a grant application I want to apply for. I think it's really fair to, they're humans, they'll get that. And this also goes to a point I made earlier, which is you can't just say you're an idiot to the peer review responses, but it really is okay to push back and say, I don't agree with this because X, Y, Z. I'm really appreciative of the feedback. I'm going to go in a different direction. I think that's okay, as long as you're not rude about it, and as long as you're not just so sort of precious about your work that you're not willing to adjust anything. And last thing, yeah. So I think being a journal editor is a huge responsibility because you're responsible for not just the author's work that they're putting out, but you're responsible for the reputation of this journal, and to a lesser extent the reputation of the publisher that's putting it out. So, nobody wants to be the journal that, the journal editor that runs some journal into the ground, right? Or that suddenly it's not doing well. So there's a lot of pressure on you, I think, as a journal editor. And so, that's something you can really tap into and sort of take that role seriously. All right. Now, working with book and handbook editors is a little bit of a different experience, right? So this is somebody that's got an edited collection, or that's one of those sort of massive handbooks, like the Oxford Handbook that Thomas mentioned. One of the things that's different, I think, mostly from a journal issue, themed issues are a little bit different of a journal, which is more like this in some ways. But with a handbook or a book, editors are putting together something that's supposed to have its own coherent identity, which is very difficult. Especially, this was such a struggle with the Oxford Handbook because you've got 54 chapters or something like that, and how do you shape 54 very different authors and perspectives into something that sort of makes sense if you were to read it as a whole, which no one would ever do, but if you did, it should somehow make sense. And also, unlike journal editors, even more so with a book or a handbook, their name is the one on the front, right? So it's really like they're staking their reputation on the quality of the work that's going into those. So just bear that in mind. I find, I don't know, we can sort of weigh in because mileage may vary here, but I find peer review for edited volumes much more enjoyable actually than journals. For it's collaborative, right? You're already accepted for the most part. You know you want your chapter in here. It's just how do we go through this sort of back and forth process, and it can be sort of interactive. Usually you get like track changes. It's got people's names on it. You can see different perspectives. So I find it actually to be a much more rewarding process for myself doing this. Oh, here's a tricky one. So I think it's important to have, and I'll give you examples here. I think it's important to have a strong vision for your chapter, for your contribution to whatever this is, but not to be too attached to the specifics of it. So I'll give you real world examples where sometimes I've had people who will write in and say, I just don't know what to do with this. Or I get a chapter that really has no focus, or it's like 3 times too long, and it's just sort of, it involves a lot of editorial labor to sort of craft it into something that has a vision. And that's also a little bit sort of uncomfortable as an editor too, because you don't want to impose a vision on somebody else. So that's good to say, this is what I want to say. This is, sort of the point that I want to make, and here's how I'm going to do that. But you also have to be flexible, right? Because to the first point again, the editor might say, hey, you're going off in an interesting direction, but that doesn't really fit the identity of this book. So, take this and can we shift it over to this other area? Can we do this? So don't be so attached to the specifics of your work that you're not able to be flexible. I've had that happen too, where people have actually, sometimes we've had to either withdraw a chapter, or the person chooses to withdraw their chapter because you just sort of get these, what we might say, creative differences. Don't be the reason that books get delayed, please. The editorial timeline for these gets so weird, but if you don't know this, and we can talk about this later too, for a lot of the major publishers, if your book ends up being late unexpectedly, it can delay publication for like a year or 2 because the timelines get weird. So sometimes they're able to shift things and accommodate, and it works, but sometimes it can be a serious delay. And in a case like this, there are other people involved, right? So it may be like significantly detrimental to other people's careers if this book gets delayed coming out. Like at my institution, for example, if something's not published, it doesn't count towards tenure or promotion, right? And so it has to be like in paper or digital to count towards that. And so sometimes, it's like Indiana Jones sliding under the door, grabbing the hat. It can get really close with getting things out the door. So try not to be that. And by the same token, please don't expect book editors to clean up really sloppy work. And sometimes this is it's the other side of that, right? So either you need a lot more time because you really want to polish something up, or you recognize that you're close to the deadline, so you just sort of throw something that's half baked at the book, and try to not do either of those if you can. I think the second one is probably better than the first if you have to do one or the other. As an editor, I would rather get something that's not quite done that I can work with and we can help sort of collaborate on that, than something that I just don't have and I don't know when I'm going to get it. Oh, great point. I actually love it if I'm editing a book, if an author writes to me and says, hey, I'm having a little bit of trouble like firming up this last idea, or what do you think about this? How do you do this? I love to just say, hey, let's hop on a call and talk about that, or let's figure out how we can shape this, or wow, actually what you're saying reminds me of this other chapter in the book. Let me connect you with them, and maybe you can figure out how to collaborate in an interesting way. So I think that's fine. And actually, I don't mind reading drafts. If people say, hey, I've got a first draft, you want to read it, give me comments, I think that's great. Collaborative, communicative, that's really good. I would say if you don't know the editor well, you don't know what it is, just ask them before sending a draft, because some people don't feel quite the same way about it that I do. But yeah. and if you couldn't get it from the image, the idea that I want here is like the perfect feeling for an editor is when everything just like comes together, right? When you're just like, yes, I've put all these pieces in place, and now like the chapters are rolling in, and it's like, boom, I got a Tetris on this, and everything just clicked into place perfectly. Okay, now working with publishers. I separated this into sort of pitching your idea and then the last part of it. And this is something, actually, I get asked more about this than anything else in publishing, is sort of how do you pitch your idea or workshop your idea? And those of you who've done books before, maybe you want to talk about your own experience when we talk about it as well. So I say it's a serious relationship with a book press, right? You know, journals, it's a little bit different, but books, you're going to be working with these people for years, and it has to be a good fit. So do your research. Make sure this is a company that you want to work with. This is sort of meeting your needs. It's really hard to back out of one once you're in it, and nobody wants to just sort of persevere through a bad relationship for a couple of years. So this may be a controversial one, so we can talk about this. But I say avoid surprise submissions. Right? I don't think, generally speaking, publishers should just get a proposal from you that they don't know is coming. I would say conferences are a good way to do this, but you can also just reach out to acquiring editors or commissioning editors and just say, hey, I'm working on this idea. Let's workshop it. And in my experience, people are very happy to hop on a call or send some emails back and forth. And then you can sort of you can whet their appetite for the thing. And then once it comes in, it's something that they've already invested time in, and I think are more... it's going to be more in line with what they want, but they also are sort of predisposed to look upon it favorably. If you don't know this part of the process, usually the way this works is the commissioning editor or the acquiring editor gets a sort of book, gets the proposal, they okay it, and then they have to make a pitch to their bosses at the press to say, yes, this is something we need to move forward with. So you have to get those people on your team, or they're not gonna make a strong case for you to move forward. This is a thing I see all the time, or I hear about. Publishers say, you know, I actually don't think this is going to be as successful as you think it is. What if you shift in this other direction? That's going to really fill a niche that's cool. And people say, yeah, I just don't believe you. But publishers have a ton of data. They can look at what's being read, when it's being read, who's reading it, geographically what's going on with that. You know, this is really successful with UK readers, but it's not successful with US readers. There's a ton of information available on this. So, you know, if they say, wow, I actually think, you know, French audiences are going to love this, but it's not going to do well in, you know, this area, that's really important for you to pay attention to. Don't oversell. Oh, my goodness. This is something that I always find hilarious when I'm doing grant reviews. I think I can say this, I just did a round of grant reviews for the New York State Council for the Arts. And every single proposal was just like, this is going to totally change the state of arts in the world, and this is absolutely essential, and my community can't survive without this avant-garde Shakespeare production, or whatever the case is. And that's great, and it's actually, you know, it's good that you feel this way, and I agree that these are very important things, but not every single thing that gets published can be this sort of paradigm-shifting, field-defining, earth-shattering work. And I think sometimes this is a question of honesty with ourselves. I remember when I wrote Unlimited Replays, I was totally convinced. I was 100% convinced that it was going to be like an NPR book that would get like interviewed, and I would see it at like Barnes and Noble. I've seen this in the wild literally like one time, and it's at the Juilliard bookstore, right? And so I took a picture with it because I was so excited. But you know, I think you have to sort of be honest with yourself about, you know, is this something with crossover potential? And if you want to write a crossover book, which is to say something that would be interesting to academic audiences and sort of mainstream readership, how do you do that? You really have to work with people on crafting that. By the same token, however, don't undersell the project, right? You know, I think people can risk, in academia, we're not always good at selling ourselves and being confident about the work that we produce, and that's a real turnoff to editors, I think, is if you don't, if you're not making a case for why your book's important, they're not going to make a case for why your book's important. So I recognize that those are sort of contradictory, but you have to sort of figure out the way to thread the needle there, I think. Here's a new sort of recent tip. A lot of the big publishers are developing AI policies, and they are not the same. So before you think about which editor you want to go with or which company you want to go with, really think about how much, if at all, you want to use AI. And I can give another example from the Oxford Handbook. We used we went to, for the cover art, we went to an artist who uses AI as part of her sort of creative practice, and OUP really pushed back on us hard and said, no, we do not use AI. Like nothing OUP, Oxford University Press, can use AI, and that's just our policy. And so we sort of had to go back and say, no, this is an artist, AI is a tool that she uses to produce, and so it became this sort of back and forth. So I think policies are all over the place. A lot of us use AI. If I'm writing a conference abstract, I will run it through, Claude and say, tighten this up, or I need to cut 10 words out of this, see if you can find it, And I see no problem with that whatsoever. But depending on the conference or depending on, the company, you may be violating some sort of policy. All right, finally, last bit, ship it. What happens when you put the book out into the world, or the sort of latter stages of a book or a large-scale project of any kind? So I would say during the process, it's really important to remember that once they've agreed, once you have a contract, the publishers want you to be successful. It's in their best interest for you to be successful. And so you can lean on them a lot. All right, what do you think I should do? How should I help with this? How can I help market this? They want to help. I would also say, these relationships can be career long, right? If you really establish a relationship with people at, Rutledge or Oxford or any of these sort of companies, it can lead from one thing to the next. You finish one thing up, then they say, let's do this. And that's exactly what happened for me with the Oxford Handbook, where Unlimited Replays came out with Oxford, and a couple of years later, their commissioning editor wrote and said, we think you'd be a great person to co-edit this book, and let's do that. So you want it to be a successful project that everybody feels good about. Before you submit, or before you get even close to the sort of end of a major project, I would double and triple check the expectations that the press has for what you're going to send to them. I see a lot of people get confused about indexing. That's an important thing to figure out sort of ahead of time. Who does the indexing? Is it them? Is it you? When are you supposed to have that done in the process? That's just an example. Image permissions are another one. Some presses want you to have the image permissions done before they see anything. Some of them say, no, go ahead and send us the stuff and work on the permissions while we're copy editing. They're just, be clear on expectations. Oh, this is a big one. I have some super funny examples of this one. But book projects, any sort of large project is going to evolve in the process of it. But make sure that the thing you give at the end has at least something to do with the thing you said you were going to produce. And I think a lot about, if you don't know, Richard Trevuskin's massive, whatever it is, 7-volume history was supposed to be this 1-volume textbook, right? And it ended up being this 100,000 word long, giant, massive thing that would never work as a textbook. And they, of course, they published it. It's a brilliant work. But I can't imagine doing that, right? Turning in something that's so radically different from the thing I said I was going to give them. And the same thing is true with timelines. It's okay to adjust the timeline, but you got to tell people you're doing that. And one summer when I was a graduate student in North Carolina, I was a research assistant for someone who was staying at the National Humanities Center, which is in that area too, and well-known musicologist, and I did this sort of research thing where I was looking at microfilm all summer, which was a great experience. But at one point, I saw the contract for the book that she was working on, and it was 10 years late. She was literally 10 years late in turning this product in. But she'd been in contact with the press over and over and over again and explained it, and they just kept extending the deadline. But I don't think it would not have worked if she hadn't been in communication with the press the whole time. And here's one that I always have to remind myself about. You have to get ready once a big project like that is done with a long silence. Because it's not like, writing paperback fiction, for example, where you're getting reviews even before the thing is commercially out because they're sending a bunch of things out and they get reviews. it takes years to get reviews or citations for academic things. So there's a real lag where you just put something out into the world and it's just met with silence, and it's sort of weird, right? And I think I've had Thomas, we could talk about this, but I several of my books, it's been at least 2 or 3 years before like an actual review comes out, or before people start to cite it because the process works so slowly. So it's kind of a strange thing. And I've started trying to enjoy that time rather than just constantly setting up Google alerts to let me know if anybody mentions it. So that's just a piece of recommendation for me. All right. That's it. I want to say thanks for letting me go through that. I know that was a lot in a pretty compressed period of time, and I would just like to say that was 39 minutes. So we did pretty well on that, Thomas. Thanks. So I will stop sharing if that's good, and we can go to questions.
All right, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Gibbons, very much. So a reminder to everyone, please drop your burning questions in response to Dr. Gibbons' talk or just in general what's on your mind in the Q&A feature. It's been pretty quiet so far, but I imagine there's a lot to just uncork and let the questions flow. I'm going to use my chair privilege to ask the first question. You referred earlier to, some of the sea changes that might come with this advent of generative AI, and I'm wondering if you could comment on how you think it will impact the academic writing and publishing industry, particularly from the perspective of writers. And what would you say as an editor to early career scholars who are tempted to incorporate generative AI to some extent into their writing?
I cannot say enough what an absolute mess this is right now, and everything I keep reading is that journals are all of a sudden being inundated by clearly AI written or AI assisted slop. There's, on the other hand, there's the issue of peer reviewers are now just feeding articles into ChatGPT and letting it generate the reader reports and sending it back in. So it's really a real wild west right now while we don't have clear policies. So I'm expecting to see more and more sort of journal policies about this that are initially going to be all over the place. So I'm assuming that some journals are going to come up with policies that say, yes, you can use this in your work, or we encourage people to use this in editing because it actually would cut down copy editing time that's involved in that. On the other hand, I can imagine a lot that are going to say absolutely not. So probably like all of us at our various universities and institutions are developing radically different policies. I think we're going to see that. What I understand from being at an institute where a lot of the faculty work on AI is there's sort of an intelligence plateau happening where the AI has gotten just about as smart as it's going to get for the near future, but it's going to be incorporated in more and more and more things. So I actually just saw a demo yesterday of individualized AI tutors for university students, where the model would be that every student gets an individualized AI tutor that answers their questions and helps them generate question sets and connects with all of the different classes that helps them make connections. Like, this is like the homework assignment you did for this other class, and and I find that very exciting, but I also find it really scary. It's a sort of I'm not technophobic by any stretch, but it's a sort of a scary moment for the industry. And I think it's the same in publishing as well, where there's, I don't know. I have no idea. And I don't think anybody else does either, is the short version. Anybody else have thoughts on that? I mean, feel free to chime in.
Well, I remember hearing from a doctoral supervisor in New Zealand about receiving, like 10 or 12 proposals for doctoral study with that person that were like all AI generated, and they would cite hallucinations of the person's own work and say, oh, when you said this, it was inspired me to do this, and it's like, that quote doesn't exist, the book doesn't exist. So there are a lot of like horror stories like that out there.
Absolutely, yeah. Mm-hmm. I see a couple of comments in the chat. I don't know, Thomas, do you want to
Definitely. Yeah, now I think things are flowing. So the first we have an anonymous participant. If you submit it anonymously, I'll just read it out. So this one, how do you think scholars in their early careers should go about choosing journals or other publishing mediums based on what professional stage they're in?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I think I have a couple of answers to that. One is that it really depends on what the expectation of your institution are. And that's to say, if I'm at a certain type of research institution, um, they might have a real clear hierarchy of the types of journals that you're expecting to publish in, right? So some of the disciplines at my school, for example, specifically say if you don't have two articles in top tier journals, you're in trouble, and here's what those journals are, right? So oof, that's a little bit challenging. I would say for early career folks, I mean, my very first article, which had absolutely nothing to do with video game music, I started off as like a French opera guy. My very first article was in the Canadian journal, like the Journal of the Canadian Musicological Society, and it was like a 10-page article on like Gluck opera, and it was great. It was a fantastic experience. They were happy to get it. They were really friendly about it. It was a nice fit. And then I published pretty early on in something like Current Musicology. I actually think like grad student run journals or smaller journals are a really great way to get started. I have a funny experience fairly early on. I think the second article I wrote about video game music is about music in a game called BioShock, and it ended up in Game Studies, which is like the leading games journal, and it's online. And it was for years and years. It was my most cited thing. And it was actually publishing that was the thing that really pushed me into doing video game music for most of my career, because I got such a great set of feedback on that. And I sent it to a different journal first. And it was like a prestigious musicology journal, I'll say it like that. And I got the most scathing peer review comments I've ever received. It was just like, why is anyone writing about this? This isn't serious. This seems like it's more for a fan magazine than any sort of legitimate source of scholarship. And it really was hard. It was hard. But that's where I really started thinking about the right fit, and thinking really carefully about aligning the things that I want to talk about with the journals there. So I'm not sure I fully answered that question, because it's a multifaceted question. And I should say this again: anybody who wants to reach out to me afterwards to ask a specific question, you're welcome to. I'm always happy to help that or help workshop where it might be a good fit or something like that. But those are some of the things I would suggest thinking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was going to say we all benefit from you earlier Ludomusicologists going through that process of trying to fight to legitimize the field. And
I really hope that doesn't happen to people anymore. I mean, I really hope it doesn't.
I mean, I haven't seen it in a while, but yeah, I think we all benefit from you going through those paces.
You're
Nina, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. Sorry, I'm sort of eating dinner. Okay, so I have a kind of specific question about like getting your book reviewed. So the context here is that my book about opera wasn't reviewed in musicology, I guess because it wasn't really a history book, and it didn't fit in any time period, and it was a more of a theoretical thing. But then I am not a music theorist anyway. Like it is okay, that doesn't matter. Anyway, so I thought the thoughts about how to make sure people actually review your book.
It's a mess, and I'll tell you, it used to be a lot easier because people would review books because you would get a free copy of the book, right? And so you're like, oh, I'm getting this massive book or $100 book for free. And now the presses don't do that because they lose money on it. So there's very little incentive, and a lot of places, as you know, don't count book reviews really towards your scholarly production, which is, in my opinion, a huge mistake. So it's hard to incentivize that. I had one press at some point, and I refused to do it, but said, well, you can buy your own copies of the book and send them to people to review. And I was like, well, I'm not going to do that. So I think, one thing to do is to, I don't know, I feel quandaries about this, but you can just specifically ask people if they would review the book. You know, like, hey, I have this book that's coming out on this. Would you be willing to do it? It feels a little bit like asking for a letter of recommendation in a weird way. But I think you probably see that a lot these days. I think mostly, though, universities are, maybe yours is different, but it's people are starting to lean away from requiring book reviews just in recognition of the fact that it's harder and harder to get people to do them. So I think the first book I had come out, my school wanted to see reviews, and then since then nobody's asked me about it. I mean, I'll put them in my CV if somebody says really nice things, but yeah, I mean, I think Unlimited Replays only got 2 or 3 reviews too, so I feel you.
Okay, well that's comforting, and I didn't realize that publishers weren't sending out copies. I mean, the last book review I did, they didn't send me one, but I don't know, I had digital access, so once I told them that, they're like, okay, so you're set, and I'm like, I still would have liked a hard copy, but
yeah. Actually, the last couple I've done, and I gave some serious feedback to the publisher about this, not that it will help, but they didn't even give me like a PDF of the book. They just gave me like a week or a month's worth of like digital access to the thing, so I had to put in a password, and I was like, at least send a PDF, so I get something out of it. It's tough, but yeah, it's kind of a dying art, I feel like, the book review.
And these online platforms, like this was Oxford University Press, and I thought their online platform was terrible, and I actually wrote about that in the review.
Yep. Oh, yeah, that's a great point, Thomas, in the chat. Asking around at NACFGM. Yeah, I mean, it weirdly has become this kind of, tap, tap, I'll review your book if you review my book kind of thing, which is not good for the field, but if you're at a school that requires it, it's sort of a game you have to play.
All right. Next, I'm just taking them as I've seen them either pop up in the Q&A and chat. Madison, would you like to unmute and ask your question? It's okay if not. I can read it out. Okay.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
I see it in the chat, right? Yeah.
So Madison says, as someone who has submitted a lot of work and not gotten any nibbles from journals publishers, the usual, we received a lot of high-quality submissions, reasons, and no other context provided. Do you have any suggestions for improving how I submit to publishing besides just keep shooting my shot?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, sort of developing those relationships, if you can, early on is helpful. To even with journals, if you contact the editor and say, I'm really interested in publishing with you, I'm working on this thing, what do you think about that? That can really be helpful. Definitely with book publishers, you want to do that. I'm actually shocked. It feels unsatisfactory for you to get that response from just like, we got a lot of submissions, nothing else. I mean, I could see that for like conference submissions, but I feel like if people take the time to submit full articles to journals, they probably should get at least some general form of feedback. So I'm really sorry to hear that's been the response you got. But yeah, I think, generally if you can develop those relationships, it's helpful. Something I've actually learned, this is totally off topic for today, but I'll tell you anyway. Something I've learned recently is that that's totally expected in the grant world, right? Grants, if you're applying for grants from foundations, things like that, the expectation is you're going to get to know the commissioning people ahead of time, right? You've probably talked with them, you've gone to webinars, you've set up coffee with them if you're in the same conference, you've developed these relationships way in advance of actually applying for the grant. So I think it's getting to be more of the same kind of thing in publishing. So that's really the only piece of recommendation I can give you. But again, if you ever want to reach out and send me something, I'm happy to take a look and offer any suggestions I can. And I like Thomas's suggestion of the JSMG editorial staff. I mean, Dana, for example, Dana Plank, who's the editor right now, is she the editor still, or is it Will Ayers now?
Still Dana Plank headed.
Okay. Well, both of those people are really fantastic at sort of figuring out how to shepherd people through that process. So I can't recommend that highly enough. Our field is really friendly compared to a lot of fields in musicology, so I love that.
All right, now we have an anonymous question. And again, if you have more questions that have generated as we have gone along, feel free to drop them through. Do you have any advice on handling copyright, particularly with transcriptions early in the publishing process?
Oh man. Okay, so oh, no one's recording it. Are we recording this? Don't send this out. We're recording this, but don't send it to the public. Yeah, okay.
We can cut around it too. I did that.
Yeah, cut around this part.
Okay.
I think it's better to just do it and then worry about it later. What I found, I remember a great story from Will Chang when he was writing his book, where he wanted to use cover art from Final Fantasy VI. And no, it was a screenshot. He just wanted to put a screenshot from Final Fantasy VI in there. And he was like, well, I'm going to check with Square and see if they're okay with me doing that. And it was like the end of the world, right? They were like, we need to see this book. We need to see every reference to this that's going on. Like, it was this whole... And he basically had to, like, slowly back away and be like, never mind. But it almost, like, unwound the whole thing. So I feel like, as long as you're making a good faith effort, it's not a huge deal. I mean, if you transcribe a whole video game soundtrack as an appendix to a book, that's going to be a problem. But I can't imagine that, if you have a 10-measure excerpt from an Assassin's Creed game, that Ubisoft is going to come after you for that. We're just not big enough for that to happen. So my general advice to people is give it a shot. Be as aggressive as you can be with the limits of the law in terms of, screenshot use, short video examples, whatever the case may be. And I have yet to hear about anybody who actually had any sort of legal problems with game soundtracks in this way. Famous last words, but that's been my experience. I saw a presentation a couple years ago at the National Association of Schools of Music meeting. From a copyright attorney who specifically works on this, and he's like, basically no university has ever gotten sued for like their band doing a piece they weren't supposed to do, and then somebody says okay, take it off of YouTube, but it's just not worth what they would possibly get out of it to pursue this, unless it's Nintendo. Yeah, for the most part we're talking about fair use stuff, right? It's just in the event that somebody like transcribed a whole bit. Actually, the article I'm working on right now is about editions of sheet music for games. And Nintendo in 2024 went on this total tirade where they just sent like a bajillion Digital Millennium Copyright Act takedown notices to all these like fan sheet music things. And then it was like right before they put out Nintendo Music, their app. So it was just about like controlling the musical language there. But other than Nintendo, I don't think anybody cares. But you do make a good point. Actually, sorry, I'm just going to keep going on this. I don't know how many of you have had this same experience, but when I talk to composers or sound designers for games, sometimes even they don't know who has the rights. I'll say, is it okay if Gary Scheinman was one for BioShock, where I was like, hey, do you have the rights? Can I use an excerpt of this in this thing? And he said, yeah, I don't know if I have the rights or not. And so then I contacted the developers, and they were like, yeah, we don't know who has the rights to that. And, it's this sort of go-around of everybody saying, we don't have the rights to this music. So it is still sort of a weird world.
All right, excellent. I'll jump in with another question here, and remember, drop more questions in the chat if you have any, or raise your hand. So I was wondering if you could give advice specifically to those who might want to get in on the editing side, like editing for an edited volume or a special journal article. You've mentioned that kind of like unified vision idea that I think is very important. But do you have any other like advice in regards to sort of like soliciting the chapters and just, from your experience, things you wish you knew on that side of things, the editor rather than the writer?
Yeah. I mean, this is one where several of us on here could comment on this, so I'm curious to see what other people have to say as well. But actually, Nina and I right now are working on proposing a special issue of JSMG. I know several other people have done this, and that's been a great process where they've been pretty happy to work with us on, here's what we're thinking about. Let's suggest a timeline. Let's think about how this might work. And so that again is a very friendly space to do it. And they've done quite a few special issues. I think journal editors actually really like special issues for the most part because it sort of it's a prepackaged thing, right? You don't have to do it individually, try to figure out how many words are going to go and fit everything in. It's sort of like a prepackaged meal, so that is, I think, really convenient for them. In terms of edited books, I think there is actually, this is a great time to be doing this. There's been a glut of video game music books, but they all seem to be doing pretty well. So editors seem like they're okay to have more. So I would look at where stuff's coming out. Routledge, I know, has published two of mine and several of others. I think Intellect has done several now. Thomas, help me out. Where am I not thinking of other presses that have been really...
Paul Gray. I know Lydia's just came out from Paul.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Lydia's just came out with Paul Gray. That's great. Yeah,
and the Cambridge, I guess, did the handbook, but or the companion. But
Yep, the Cambridge Companion, the Oxford Handbook. I think there is an acknowledgement that this is still a growing field and something that people seem to have a lot of interest in. So there's a lot of opportunities. I would just try to figure out how to find something that straddles the fence between not radically different from what everybody else is doing, but different enough that there's meat to that, right? It's not just like 2.0 of something that's already come out. So I think there's a lot of ground and there's a bunch of different areas that we're all interested in right now. Transmedia work. There's so much fertile ground in terms of like video game music history or global video game musics. I think there's just a ton of different areas. I would say I almost always recommend co-editing for major projects. It's just a lot of time, and it can be editing books especially. It's like silence for months, and then you gotta get stuff turned around in like a week, right? And so if that happens to be the week, and you don't know ahead of time usually when that's going to be, right? The press just says, okay, you got copyrights, we need these in a week. And so it's really helpful if you can distribute that labor, or on the off chance that like you're on vacation that week, and real life story. I get 48 hours to turn around proofs, but I'm like off in the middle of nowhere on vacation, and so I have to like park myself back at the hotel and read page proofs for 2 days on my vacation. So I would say, if you can be collaborative in that way, it's good. In terms of choosing, there's two ways to go about this, I think, and I think there are advantages to both. One is having sort of a call for papers where you put out the topic and you say, who wants to write in. Advantages to that are you don't have to have sort of a prepackaged set. But sometimes it's a little bit of a wild card, right? And then the advantage to choosing your own authors, the disadvantage, I guess, is it can get a little bit insular. Sometimes we all have a tendency to just go to the same 10 people over and over again, and then it just sort of becomes, we're all writing chapters for each other's books, and that works out that way. But on the other hand, if you know somebody's really good and they follow deadlines and they get stuff in that's going to be good, that's hard to pass up, right? Somebody who turns out a decent article that's at the word count and you don't have to do a lot of work to it, it is like gold, right? You have your whole thing there. And it's funny for me, actually. I used to write like 3 or 4 articles for books a year because I found it like super rewarding, and it's easy, relatively speaking to other things. But now nobody asked me to do it, and I talked to Kate Galloway, who works at my school, and I was like, hey, it's so funny, and she was like, oh, I'm working on one. You want to write a chapter for that? And I was like, sure. So it worked out nicely, but I think it's I don't know. It's really rewarding, I would say. Again, check with your school if you're a faculty member, because some schools view journal articles and book chapters at the same level of sort of publication, and some of them see a distinction, with journal articles being higher because of the anonymous peer review and book reviews being lower. Book chapters being lower. I actually think book chapters sometimes speak very highly to people because it shows that you're regarded in the field, that you were asked to do this. So again, just ask those questions.
All right, and I think we have a question from Nina, if you want to unmute and ask again.
Hi. So I've kind of gotten the habit of, when I get a revise and resubmit, to write like a cover letter, because I think at one time that was sort of like you're expected to do that. But I sometimes there's not like a slot on those online things, and I like, is it expected or is it not? I don't know. I don't know.
That's a great question, Nina. I feel like it's like half and half, right? There probably are journals that still expect that. Like I probably, if I wrote to like, I don't know, Journal of Musicology or something like that, they probably
Yeah.
still would expect that. Um, Most of the time, I'm just looking for an email that kind of like summarizes, hey, I did these. Or I use track changes sometimes when I send things back in and just say, I updated this to do this and um, I'm trying to think what I do. I guess I do the email version of the letter that's just a couple of paragraphs of, thanks so much for this feedback. In response, here are the big changes I made, and go from there. But I don't think you could go wrong doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I mean, not that I like to write the letter, but I think it's helpful. I think it's helpful to sort of like, even in my mind, to like summarize like what I did, and then yeah, and then also because there will be things that you don't do, right? So then you have to kind of like explain that, like why you didn't do that thing that they told you to do.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
and that's and I have occasionally pointed to contradictions between the two
mhm.
letters and said, reviewer one asked me to do this, reviewer two said to do this. I went with this direction because X, Y, Z. But to me, the biggest thing is showing some sort of engagement with it rather than just doing nothing. But you raise a really good point, where sometimes it's just helpful for you to remember what you did and why you did it versus just, I don't know. Sometimes you get to the point, I don't know about you all, but I get to the point where I'm like, I just want to never see this again. And you can't write that in the letter, I guess, but yeah.
Yeah.
For your monograph, I'm looking at Thomas, wrote a 2-page cover letter responding to reader reports. Yep. Comments on the PDF instead. You just never know. I guess it's another ask the publisher what they want kind of question. How many reader reports did you get back, Thomas, on the monograph?
I had 2 reader reports for my monograph, and then my second monograph, I got 3 reports on the proposal.
Okay. Yep. That seems about right. In my experience too, and I'm guessing other people would have those thoughts.
Yeah, whole monograph reports are rough because you really have to dedicate a good chunk of time to doing it.
Oh man, yeah. They do. If people don't know this, you do typically get paid to do those. If you're a reader for if Oxford calls up and says, "Hey, we have this monograph, we'd like to do that," they usually say, "We'll give you, I don't know what it is, $125 or $250 of books," right? So that at least feels. It's like an insultingly low amount, but at least feels better than like, please put in all this labor for nothing, which you sometimes get for, like journal stuff.
Well, and another thing on one of your earlier points was sometimes those reviews can lead to future opportunities. Like one time when I did a monograph review reader report for Routledge, then they asked on the tail end of that after I submitted it, do you have any book projects that you'd like to propose? And so that's kind of the genesis of getting the contract for my second monograph book. So.
Yep, that's a great point.
All right, well, I think we are fresh out of questions, it looks like. Give the last call here. Any questions, raise your hand or forever hold your peace. All right, I think that is going to do it. That's going to do it for today's Level Up webinar. So everyone, please give Will Gibbons a huge round of applause in the chat. Make sure we all make him feel welcome and thanked for his time.
Thank you all. This is a real treat to be able to talk about this. And like I said, if I can ever be of help to any of you all individually, please reach out. I'm happy to do that.